Recording. Hello and welcome to the arena. This is a Twitch broadcast as part of Serious Play, where we play and watch competitive video games. We've been doing a lot of playing lately, playing Starcraft 2, but today we're gonna watch. I am one of your hosts. I'm Eric Kirsting, and I'm joined by two lovely people.
I'm Janelle Malagon.
And I'm Kelly Breivik.
And I left my Dr. Pepper in the other room, so I'm gonna go grab it.
Beautiful. I've got my sparkling ice cherry limeade right next to me.
All right,
because
there we
I'm
go.
just doing breakfast.
Did you say you just ate breakfast?
Yep.
What'd you eat?
I had some hash browns and sausages.
Nice. I hope you guys are ready for something for lunch then. Cheese.
Beautiful.
We talked about.
Oh my board! I'm ready for the cheese.
We talked about cheese last week on the arena, or 2 weeks ago on the arena, or 3 weeks ago on the arena. I don't know. Last time we did it, we talked about cheese, just like using strats to beat your opponent early, right? Like catching them off guard, right? Not winning a straight up game. And we're gonna see that today.
Nice.
Today I've queued up a whole stream, a whole day of the GSL. So I want to explain to you guys what the GSL is, and then I want to describe like what the group format is for like this particular day of play, and we're just gonna watch as much of this particular round of 24 group B as much as possible. There's 5 matches. Hopefully we'll get to all of them. The total video is 3 hours long, but we're going to be skipping through like any ads or anything like that. So we might be able to actually watch the whole series. But the GSL is I believe the Global Starcraft League is the name of the like the longer name, but everyone just calls it the GSL. It's put on, as you can tell, in the top right hand corner of your of the video, Africa TV, which is like a Korean broadcast thing. It's funny that it's the Global Starcraft League, yet nearly all the players are Korean, and it takes place in Korea. I think part of the reason it's called the GSL is because there actually was a KSL, Korean Starcraft League, which was from a different company and different organization, right? But the GSL,
I mean, it's kind of like how there's, all the movies of all these like global organizations, but it always happens in a Western country.
Yeah, this is true. Like the baseball MLB champions are the world champs, right? Even though, I mean, technically there is a Canadian team playing in the MLB, but it's kind of similar to that. But the GSL is in Korea, and I would say, for most people's money, the GSL is the premier StarCraft tournament, like the biggest of the big. Like StarCraft, of all the StarCraft organizations and things, the only thing bigger is probably the big BlizzCon end of the year tournament, which crowns the world champion and the most money. But outside of that, which is only once a year, the GSL is the biggest deal. And some might even say that winning a GSL is almost, if not more impressive than winning a world championship. They're very different tournaments, because the world championships is like a weekend tournament, right? Like you spend all your qualifying for it, right? And those are all weekend tournaments too, generally like that. But the actual end of the year is like, it's just like 3 days. Who's the best in those 3 days? That's the world champion, right? And you have to play a ton of matches. Whereas with the GSL, it takes place over, like, this is round of 24, which was the first round. That started in early March, and the tournament's still not done. We're in the round of 4 right now, actually. We're not going to finish until early June. And so it takes so much longer, right? It's like an actual, like, league, right? Like, play, and, like, and it's not like your typical, like, NFL or something where it's like round robin, all the teams play each other, and you figure out who the champion is. It's still a tournament though, but because of the format of being able to be so much longer, the GSL is able to like have the competitors actually like prepare against one another, right? Like Rogue knew that he would be playing Kawaiian, 2 or 3 weeks out from this game, right? So he was prepping, right? He's practicing, like, what is Kawaiian? How does he play, right? And some would say that yields a higher level of competition and mind games, right? Than simply like, oh, I play Zerg, they play Protoss, I'm going to bring my best Zerg build against Protoss, right? That kind of thing, where you don't have as much time to prep for the individual you're playing against, more just to prep against the race or that kind of thing. I'm going to turn down my mic just a little bit. We can see here that we got 2 players here. And so I want to get into the match now. Do you guys have any questions about the GSR? Did I explain everything okay?
No, I don't have any questions right now.
Yeah, we're good. Sorry, that took me way too long to unmute myself.
I do want to say just a quick format of what the group is like. So Rogue and Kawaiian play a best of 3, and then the other 2 members of this group are Scarlet and Innovation, and they'll play a best of 3. The winner of those 2 best of 3s will play in a winner's match, and the losers will play in a loser's match. And the basic gist is, if you win 2 matches, you advance to the next round, the round of 16. If you lose 2 matches, you're out of the tournament. So let's just say like Rogue, like if whoever wins this one, they go on to the winner's match. If they win another, they go on to the round of 16. If they lose that second match, they go to the deciders match, right? Where they face the winner of the losers battle. Does that make sense? So yeah, does that make sense? Just making sure that we have the ground rules set up.
Yep.
All right, good. So there's a lot of money on the line and a lot of prestige on the line. Let's give a quick background. This is Rogue and Kawaiian. Rogue, former world champ. He is I think 2018 world champion, maybe 2017 world champ. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think Maru was 2018, so Rogue was, I think, 2017. Rogue is an amazing Zerg player. Generally plays a more defensive kind of Zerg style. Meanwhile, we got Kawaiian. Kawaiian's a Terran player, more of an up-and-comer, maybe someone who's stuck around the scene for a while, but isn't necessarily a top dog, right? I don't think he's won a GSL, for instance, and he definitely has never been world champion or anything like that. Doesn't mean Kawaiian's a bad player, right? But he's the underdog in this situation. And I'm gonna hit play, but as we can see in the middle here, we can see the maps that they're playing, which were average. That went by a little quicker than I was imagining, but there was Everdream is our first map, which is not one of the ones that we played. But then we get a close up of their faces. I'm gonna turn up the music just a little bit.
This is such an intense introduction.
Yeah, I just had to turn you both up.
All right, turned up the music just a little bit. Okay, so now normally we zoom in on their bases and things would be chill, but Kawaiian is a cheeser, baby. So we see Kawaiian is sent out an SCV and is building a barracks right next to his opponent's base. That is not the mark of a true sportsman here, right? That is the mark of somebody who's looking to get a little dirty with the opponent, right? And so right now Kawaiian's just making some gas, and Rogue has these overlords, right, which are scouting across the map looking for any of things like this. So this is called a proxy racks. And what a proxy means is like you build something not in your main base, right? It's proxied somewhere else. And so that's gonna finish. Now it's only a proxy 1 rack, so this might sound weird, but because Terran can float and lift their buildings, building one building outside of your base isn't necessarily like an all-in level of cheese. So what that means is like an all-in level would be like, if this doesn't do damage or kill my opponent, I lose, right? Because I'll be so far behind. But if you just do 1 racks, it's no big deal. If it doesn't do that much, it's okay. But we can see that he's committing by building one of those bunkers, right? Which can house units right there. But Rogue has already got Zerglings, and so he's going to have to abandon building the bunker. So we would say that this is probably like a failed rush. Building a factory back at home so that you can make those mech units. So he's got 1 Reaper here, and the Reaper is trying to take out some of these Lings. Now, the Reaper, in a straight up fight with no micro, probably loses to the Lings. But because you can move the Reaper around, it's faster than the Lings, and it has a range attack. It can 1 Reaper can theoretically kill like infinite, Zerglings.
This is super interesting because I'm thinking back to one of our conversations when we were playing the game. And I was thinking about how can I better understand how these characters move. And I just saw that Reaper jump up over that ledge, which is probably not very impressive, but was very impressive to me. And I'm like, all right, so what do I need to do that?
Yeah, so the Reaper is there's only, I think, 2 units in the game that can walk up cliffs. The Reaper is one of them. And the other one is the Colossus, which is this like giant, like War of the Worlds style thing with like laser beam eyes. And it's so big, it can be attacked by air-to-air units. And it's so big, it can walk up walls. But the Reaper is definitely the one you're going to see more often walking up walls, because that's kind of its thing. It's a very mobile unit, and it has those little bombs that you're seeing, like it can throw out, which don't do very much damage, but they'll bounce units, which can be a tactical advantage. But the Reaper scales terribly because it doesn't have very good range and it doesn't have very good damage. So in a straight up fight, like you don't want to have like 30 Reapers. Like they're not going to do anything unless your name is Beyun. And Beyun was like the 2016 world champion, and he won by just making lots of Reapers. It was a really crazy strat. And it was really, Rihanna is one of the most impressive players I've ever seen. But we are settling more into a macro game here. So we see that Kawaiian's tried early on to try to do some sort of cheesy play, try to get that bunker down, try to deny possibly the second base of Rogue. But Rogue is now going up to 3 bases, and the pressure is really on Kawaiian to do some damage, to slow Zerg down. Because generally speaking, the way that Zerg versus Terran goes is that the Zerg is trying to expand. The Zerg always wants to be 1 base up on the Terran, because Zerg needs extra bases to do more production, right? To make units. And on top of that, Zerg just in general is more inefficient than Terran is. And so here we see that Rogue got Overlord speed, and when he scouted Kawaiian, and he scouted that Kawaiian was making Banshees, and has a starport with a tech lab. So in Starcraft, you have to scout your opponent, and you really have to try to understand what they're trying to do so that you can try to react to it. And as I noted, Rogue is more of a defensive player, and Zerg in general is a more reactionary race, right? Typically, Terran is going to be kind of picking the tempo of the match. So this is a really crucial moment here. So Rogue is going to scout the fusion core, which is that building with like the 4 like weird orange things poking up out of it to the right. The fusion core allows the Terran to build the battleship. What is that? Battleship? Battleship is not the right word. Battle cruiser. The battle cruiser is like the big flagship of the Terran army. It's this huge unit that does a lot of damage. It's really, really strong. It can teleport across the map. You can see it right there. The first one just spawned, and he's probably going to make a second one. The problem is that that's more of a late game unit. So Kawaiian has sacrificed a lot of resources, but here we have a fight going on. So here Kawaiian's trying to get damage with these Hellbats, and they're not doing very much, and most of them are dying they haven't like done much damage. So the way that you want to look at that kind of engagement there is that Kawaiian had to do economic damage in order to really succeed, but what ended up happening is he ended up killing a lot of like army units, but didn't do any economic damage. So now the Zerg, we can see in the bottom part of our screen, is up by almost 30 workers. That's a lot of workers, right? That's a big economic advantage. What that means is, of course, Zerg's gonna be able to make more units, and Zerg's gonna, in the long run, do more damage. So now the pressure is really on Kawaiian, who's down in worker supply by a ton, and just equal in army supply. So Kawaiian has to do some economic damage here, kill some workers. There he got 3, but as we noted, it's a 30 worker lead. You got to kill more than 3, right, to stay even. Here he's using his little Hellions to try to harass the 4th base, or actually that's the 5th base. He tries to fly over and get his own 3rd. So one thing is, like, as I noted, Terran, is okay with being down 1 base, right? But Terran does not want to be down 2 bases or 3 bases. That's a death sentence. But here we can see that Rogue is like really pulling ahead, because basically we can like look at this game as Kawaiian's been trying to kind of harass and do economic damage, but it's all kind of fallen short. Like he hasn't really gotten any of that damage done. And as a result, Rogue now has a big lead and both in terms of worker and army supply. So Rogue, if we look up at the production tab in the top left, which can be really useful when you're watching the game, he's building mutalisks, which are this air to air. That's a unit that can fight. It's an air unit that can fight air and ground units, and it's really, really fast. So he's hoping to use that to kind of close out the game and perhaps do some economic harassment. But we got these 2 battle cruisers here now, and they're flying across the map to do some damage, while the mutas are also flying across the map to do some damage. So it's really a question of who can do more damage, and with their attacks. So here the flock of mutas is flying in, and you can see the missile turret, which is an anti-air defense, is not built yet. So now Kawaii has to teleport those guys back home, those battle cruisers. And again, the missile turrets were not built at either base, and so the mutas were able to deny it. Ooh, that Yamato. So 15 workers go down here. So again, we're back up to a 30 worker lead, which is just a really, really big lead. And so it's not looking good for Kawaii in this one. But we can really trace the genesis of this to the fact that Kawaii has been trying to like slow down the Zerg, right, with all these different attacks and stuff, and he just failed every time, right? Like he wasn't like Zerg defended really well, and now the economic lead is just so vast. And the thing about an economic lead is an economic lead for 1 or 2 minutes maybe isn't the end of the game, but an economic lead for 5-6 minutes, that's the end of the game, right? Like you know what I mean?
So at what point is it like a GG, there's no chance?
I think,
or do you not really do that at this level?
You definitely do it at this level, but I would say we're not there quite yet. Then the main reason would be that Kawaii has these battle cruisers, and Rogue's army is, though we're getting there now, because now it's almost a 50 worker lead for Rogue, a 50, but remember that but Kawaii can't see the worker count, right? Kawaii can't see that he's 50 workers behind, or that Rogue has 180 supply, right? But Kawaii probably knows that he's lost this game. But the mutalisks, which are what I would say is the reason why Kawaii is sticking in this game is because Rogue doesn't have a very good straight up army. Rogue's army is a lot of these like those Zerglings or those mutas are really fast units that are really that abuse their mobility, but aren't necessarily great in a straight up fight. And so Kawaii's sticking in the game because if he might be able to win a straight up battle, like this right here. But I think this is where he's gonna tap out, because that might just be too many mutalisks. No, okay, Rogue's gonna back out. If those mutalisks can take out the battle cruisers, that's it. But oh yeah. So you can see those. I think you built some of those. The Widow Mines, they burrow underground and shoot. They have a big. There it is. There's GG. The Widow Mines offer a big comeback potential too, because they do extra damage to light units, and both the Zerglings, Banelings, basically Rogue's whole army was light units. So Kawaii was sticking in the game, hoping that maybe his Widow Mines would accidentally take out a whole flock of mutas or something like that. But Rogue manages to take it. And that is, honestly, it's funny that was our first game, because I picked this because some of the later games are really exciting and interesting. But that actually was a classic Starcraft game right there, the one we just watched. Because you have one player who's kind of playing a more defensive economic style, and you got one player who's trying to make some aggressive moves and determine the tempo of the game. In this case, the player who was defended well enough that they were just able to get a lead, and then they used that lead to win the game. Like that was basically the story of the game, which is that's basic Starcraft. Like at its really most basic level, that is how Starcraft games are won and lost.
So what are some of the StarCraft lore games, like the sort of the Leroy Jenkins of StarCraft, the Chun-Li multi-block battle?
So there's more like memes than specific games, I think. Oftentimes things will be repeated a lot. Cats are in the middle of a violent gladiator battle. They're behind me. So one of the biggest ones I would say is "so many Banelings," which was a phrase I think uttered by Artosis during during I think it was an MLG tournament back in like 2011 or 2010. But basically some player had made like 70 banelings, and like, you know, banelings are these suicide bombers, right? And like they just rolled in and destroyed everything, right? And Artosis just yells like, so many banelings, and that became like basically whenever anyone makes banelings, a lot of them, people will say so many banelings. That's like one example of that. Banelings are definitely a fodder for a lot of memes, because like probably what most people cite is the greatest game of all time, which we actually did watch last time we watched some competitive Starcraft, was between Scarlet and Bomber in 2012 for the Red Bull for a Red Bull tournament. And in that game, it was super back and forth the entire time. And at the very end of the game, one of the things that you can do is you can research Burrow, which basically allows any Zerg unit to actually go underground, right, and hide. But burrowed banelings, they can be hidden underground, and then you can press a button to explode them, right? And so if your opponent is walking their army over your burrowed banelings and they explode, right, like that.
Dude, that's brutal.
Exactly. And so like after this really tense back and forth game where all the players were like, you know, they were down to like their final things, like, you know, both of them had done tons of economic damage, so it was their current army was about it for both of them. And then like you know, Scarlet burrows some banelings, and note, up until this point she hadn't burrowed any banelings the entire game, right? And so like when it happened, it was like obviously huge shock to Bomber, right? He wasn't expecting it, and then boom, his whole army is just gone. That's a really memorable moment. So those are some that come to mind initially. To talk about the game that we're watching currently, I'll just note that both players are playing pretty you know, standard kind of play right now. Both of them expanded to a second base right away, which means we're not seeing any really early aggression. Like this Reaper, for instance, is probably going to make it to Rogue's base probably like a full minute or minute and a half later than the other Reaper did we saw from the other game, right? So this isn't a Reaper that's meant to do damage, right? It's just a Reaper meant to scout. But did that answer your question, Kelly?
Yes, it did. I'm almost like more interested in like the little moments that become memes more than like entire games that become legends.
I think they're both interesting for sure. I think one
is like the cheap sort of quick reward, whereas the other is like a long haul, and I'm here for those cheap rewards.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's probably other moments too. There's a moment from this tournament which which was really amazing, which was Parting. I think it was Parting versus somebody. Parting actually built a Nexus, which is like the main base, in his opponent's base, but hit it. So it wasn't BM, right? He did it at the very start, and then he built up an army, and the Nexus has this ability called Recall, where you can recall. It's supposed to be like recall your army back home, right? Like in case you need it, right? Like a quick teleport. But then what he did is he recalled his army into his opponent's base, and took the opponent by complete shock. There's a lot of great moments. Like StarCraft is full of them, because like the way that the game is played is just it's so open, right? Like there's so many options of what you can do in a game, because you can choose in what order you build buildings and build units, right? And it's all about trying to figure out and get an edge over your opponent, right, through those build orders and things like that. So as I noted before, Terran has to do some amount of damage, right? Like in this matchup, Zerg versus Terran, at least the way the meta is currently, Terran cannot just sit back and do nothing, right? They can't just be like, I'm going to play defensive, because if they're both just playing defensive, Zerg's going to win, because Zerg's going to take more bases quicker, and it can get an economy up faster, because Zerg can build a lot of workers at a time, whereas Terran and Protoss can't. They can build one worker at a time. So here we've got this is that harass, right? He's got 2 drop ships full of Marines, and they're gonna fly around and they're gonna harass. Now the thing is, Zerg doesn't have great anti-air, so like you see these Zerglings, they can't do anything to these medevacs. They can just follow it around and be like, "Don't you come near me," right? It's kind of funny, but so Quine was trying to do some damage with those drop ships, and unfortunately he did not manage to actually do much. He managed to stop the creep spread a little bit. And as we noted when we were playing, creep allows Zerg to move faster on it, right? And it also gives vision. Well, that's kind of a misnomer. Creep does not give vision. This is actually a common misconception. It is the creep tumors, which are used to spread the creep, which give the vision, which, you know, there can be moments where there's actually creep on the map, but Zerg can't see where that creep can't see what's on the creep. But creep is really important for Zerg because Zerg wants to expand all over the place. Okay, so here Kawaii's making a push. So he set up those siege tanks there, and you can see that the siege tanks are these really long-ranged units, right? That have this big AoE attack. So what he's done is he's planted them by those rocks, and now what he's doing is he's kind of dancing around with the Marines, and he's kind of hoping. Okay, so we'll see. That's a lot of Zerg. Okay, so the Zerglings get on top of the tanks, and that does not work out very much. So Kawhi is definitely behind at this point. So now he's going into the opponent's base with his dropship. They're called medevacs. I call them dropships because that's what they're called in StarCraft 1. But this push has really failed. And again, we look at the supplies. Kawaii's down 10 workers and Kawaii's down 25 army supply. And so again, you know, this is really making it look like Zerg is kind of OP because Kawhi keeps trying to like slow down the Zerg and keeps failing. But really what this kind of shows is that like Rogue is just outclassing Kawhi. Like Kawhi is having a really hard time with any of his aggressive moves of really doing any damage, and he's falling behind because his aggressive moves just aren't working out.
Watching those Zerglings chase down that battle cruiser was just so sad.
All right, so here we've got a battle going on here. This actually might just be I don't know if it's going to be a killing blow, but like the thing with Terran, and this is like the big difference, like you really like what I love about StarCraft is that all the races are so different. And so, okay, so the Zerglings take out that supply depot and are getting in. Now that's not enough Zerglings to kill Kawaiian, but it's, you know, it's not good. It's not good. You don't want Zerglings in your base. That's a lot of Zerglings though. And so I'll explain the differences between Zerg and Terran maybe in between this game and the next one. So here the Zerglings are, you really don't want Zerglings in your base because they're fast and they can just keep running around and they're causing you headaches, right? And so here, you know, Quine is trying desperately just to get these Zergs out. But while this is happening, Rogue is already ahead, right? So this, yeah, then there's a GG. And Kawaiian beats Rogue. So let's talk about the differences between the races just a little bit because they become really evident in those games. So with Terran, they have those siege tanks, right? Siege tanks are honestly probably better than any unit Zerg can make, period, right? A single siege tank is better than any single Zerg unit. But the way that Zerg works is Zerg can mass produce units a lot easier than other races can. And so the siege tank takes a long time to build and comes out of a factory with a tech lab, right? So you can't just make tons of siege tanks. And so what we saw there is that Kawaiian invested in some siege tanks early on, and those siege tanks were doing okay, but then they got destroyed. Now the thing is Zerg, whatever they lost to the siege tanks, which was mostly Zerglings, they can remake them like that, right? But the siege tank count is really important to keep high, right? If you lose all your siege tanks as Terran, it's gonna take a long time to get those back, right? You can't just remake your army instantly like Zerg can. And that's kind of what we saw in that game, is that if all those siege tanks that were alive before hadn't died in that push, then maybe Kawaiian would have had enough to stop that push of Zerglings at the end. But because the siege tank count was reset, so to speak, that allowed the Zerglings to really do all that damage. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move on to our next game. This is going to be Scarlet versus Innovation, and it's at our 54-minute mark. So Innovation has won a lot of GSLs. I think Inno has won 4 GSLs and a GSL Super Tournament, or 3 in a Super Tournament. I don't remember if Innovation has ever been a world champion. I'm actually gonna Google that. Innovation StarCraft 2. Meanwhile, as noted before, Scarlet, played in the greatest game ever in 2012, which is Scarlet versus Bomber game. I believe it was game 3. Let's see. Has he ever been world champion? I'm looking at his page on Liquidpedia. I mean, his total earnings is really high, so I wouldn't be surprised. Results. WSG. I can't find it right now. Oh wait, World Championship Series. Maybe he is. I feel like he's had to have been world champion at some point. I don't want to spend any more time looking at it. But Innovation is a storied player, one of the greatest Terrans to ever play StarCraft 2. Scarlet, one of the best foreign Zergs, especially. So there's only 2 foreigners playing in the GSL tournament, right? Who qualified, and so there's Scarlet and Special, who's a Mexican player. Scarlet is Canadian. But Scarlet is not one of the all-time greats. Like, she's a really amazing player. Scarlet is generally a more macro-oriented player, but she has been known to mix in kind of aggressive plays. Innovation is known for some really brutal timing pushes and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and let's watch. So as opposed to before, where Kawine was kind of the clear underdog, I would say that this one's a little more even. And I'd give Innovation a slight edge because Inno is just a storied player. Like, he's actually, Scarlet's never won a GSL or been a world champion, while Inno has, but Scarlet has been one of the best players in the world for like 6 or 7 years, or probably even longer, like 8 or 9 years. So Scarlet is a great player. So here it's again Zerg versus Terran though. So like that's we're gonna see a lot of ZVT today, which is good. So by showing the same matchup, we're gonna get more of a feel for it than if we were watching like Protoss versus Terran now or Terran versus Terran, because those are very different than every matchup has a very different feel, which is part of the reason why StarCraft can be exciting to watch. Is that it's like in Dota or League where you ban heroes and stuff, where that changes the feel of the game, right? Like, because the whole game changes, right? Or in Overwatch, right? A game with or without Mercy or Reinhardt is going to feel a lot different than a game with them. And so it's the same thing with like what the matchup is. So here we've got so Scarlet is fast expanding. So she's building a second base before she's building a spawning pool, which would allow her to build Zerglings in. Oh no. Yeah, she built this. Yeah, she built the hatchery before she built the spawning pool, and so that signals economic, not very aggressive kind of play. Meanwhile, Innovation is building a barracks in his base, and is doing a really standard opener too. So I would give both players are kind of just playing kind of their what's it called, milk with toast, right? What's that word? You know what I'm talking. Milk with toast. What's that word? Milk with toast.
I don't know what it.
Yeah, milk. One second.
Milk toast.
Milk toast. That's what it. Milk toast. I guess milk toast actually means timid, feeble person, feeble, insipid, or bland. I mean it in the bland way. These are kind of bland openers. Hatch first is probably the most common Zerg build, while racks and base into factory and second command center on the low ground is like really standard. It's just really standard play, like nothing really shocking here. So here the Reaper tries to deny the third base, and you see that what Scarlet does there, she actually sends the drone to make that little extractor, but she's not actually planning on completing the extractor. That's just to save the worker. Right now the workers, she canceled it. Now the drone is back again. She spawns like a building there, right? But then she's gonna cancel the building, and that's one way that Zerg can really abuse the drone, right? Because you can just turn it into a building and be like, nah, you're not a building anymore, right? If it's getting harassed. But that doesn't work on like that doesn't work beyond this stage of the game. Like typically, if you're, if they're bringing in like a bunch of Marines or something, you're not gonna try to transform all your units into buildings. You're just gonna end up wasting your money. But the Reaper can't really kill a building, so it works out. But here the Reaper's just trying to do light harass. This is what we might call like, it's almost like a skill test of the opponent when you send the Reaper out to do that kind of thing, because what you're really saying to the opponent is like, I'm just going to keep you busy, and you have to keep doing everything you're doing, macroing and everything, and building your units, right, and making sure you're not getting supply blocked. You're gonna have to keep doing all that while I'm in your face with this one little Reaper bothering the heck out of you like a fly in your face, right? So that's kind of the purpose of that Reaper, right? It's not gonna win you the game, but you're hoping it might make your opponent, fuck up a little.
Sure, it's just a kind of ongoing distraction.
Exactly. So here,
I imagine that the difficulty is not getting distracted yourself, by committing a lot of time to that.
That's true. You have to, you don't want to push out too far, right? Here we actually see a very similar push to what we saw Kawayan do. Kawayan was doing this the same thing here with the Kawayan was doing like I think a couple Hellions and a Reaper. I think he did 4 Hellions and 2 Reapers, but it's a similar kind of push here with 2 Hellions and a Reaper. And Inno is just trying to. No, I'm shortening Innovation's name to Inno just because that's what I call Inno in my head. Here, so Inno actually builds a Viking right away. So the thing is, see those flying overlords? They're good scouting units, right? Because they can, float over the base. But if you build 1 Viking, you can kill all your opponent's overlords that are sitting around your base. So here, gets a free kill on that. But now that's a lot of Hellions. So, all right, but he also has a Banshee. So Banshee's and a Banshee that's cloaked. So the Banshee is this bomber unit, right? That can do a lot of damage to mineral lines if left undone. So what he's hoping to do here is he's hoping to distract with the Hellions up front, and I think he's going to send the Banshee in the back, and then he's gonna send the Banshee in the back and try to do damage that way. So he's like, right, it's like a 2-pronged attack. Like, look at like the queens are the prime anti-air, and look at how far away they are from the bases, right? From the drones. So here, is like pushing with the Hellions. So I'm really interested in what that Banshee's doing. That Banshee needs to fly in and do some damage, but it's just sitting on the outskirts. I don't know why Inno hasn't sent it in. He could be pooling, or he could be waiting to get 2, because I think 2 Banshees will. Yeah, there's the second Banshee. So 2 Banshees will one-shot a worker, right? So you can just target down a single worker, kill it. Target down another worker, kill it. That kind of thing. So here the Hellions are trying to keep doing that harass, keep them occupied. The Hellions they're kind of like a Zerg unit. They're really fast, and they move around the map really quickly. So here we've got these guys. Now, will they be spotted by this overlord? That's really key, because all right, so it does show up for a second. So what we'll have to see is whether Scarlet saw that. It doesn't look like it, but she does have what's it called? An anti-air structure there. That's the Spore Crawler. And so now flying into the main, getting more damage. Like so far, 7 workers have gone down, which is good because Scarlet's still up 5 workers after killing those 7 die. Now only 4. But that slows down the Zerg's economy, right? I don't know how much a worker does per minute, like in terms of minerals off the top of my head, but you can look at it as if you're dropping from, let's say, 60 to by 7, you're losing about 10% of your economy, right? And in these battles, 10% less army, right, or 10%, or or more than 10% if you have to remake those workers, that can be a big deal. So here, just trying to keep them busy at the front. Look at, it's pretty impressive there. Like, we look at that. Inno just didn't lose much during that whole time, right? Inno was flying around the opponent's base with these Hellions, and they just showed the units lost tab, and Inno hasn't lost very much at all. And that's what makes Inno, like, a great player, right? With Kawayan, we saw him do these kind of pushes, move out with the Hellions and stuff, and he was losing that army. But now look at all this army that Inno was building while his other army was, like, doing work, right? And so now Scarlet's got to defend this. This is a really deadly push. The siege tanks are gonna go down. No, one of the siege tanks does survive. That's like when you watch a lot of StarCraft, you learn which parts of the game to look at. So in that engagement, I know to look at the siege tanks, because if the siege tanks are sitting in back getting all of their shots off, Terran wins that fight 10 times out of 10, right? It doesn't matter what happens in the rest of the fight. But as we saw, they actually were Scarlet was able to get Zerglings onto Inno's army. And then there again, once the siege tank gets sieged up, Scarlet has to back off. But yeah, like what I was saying, if the siege tanks are really what you want to be looking at. So again, the siege tank is coming up, and that's a lot of Marines. The Marines are doing a lot of damage. The siege tank is sieged up again. There's not a lot of Hydras, and there's another rally of guys coming up. Oh, the Marines come just in time. Oh, but the siege tank does go down. And so Inno's army is getting thinned out. But if we look at the supplies, Inno is still up by 20. He's only down 6 workers, and they have similar army supply. And he's on the offensive, right? And so we could say that Inno's has a good lead right now. The other thing you want to look for in these engagements, other than Well, Scarlet might just lose here. She has no army left, and there's a siege tank here raining down on her base, right? And so
man, it doesn't look good.
So Scarlet's trying to like back up, but the thing is, the siege tank is really good against Hydras. The siege tank is generally good against it's good against all units, but it's very good against Lings and Hydras, which is what Scarlet's main composition is. So like every time one of these siege tanks fires, it is really bad news. You cannot have the siege tank just sieged up there doing its thing, right? If you have to fight through the entire rest of the army, right, all of those Marines in order to get to the siege tanks, you're not going to win that fight very often. The other thing I'll note, the other thing you want to keep track of in these Terran versus Zerg engagements. Okay, so there goes. So you see the siege tank isn't that strong, right? A couple Lings get on top of it and it dies because the siege tank actually has what we call like a blind spot. Like it actually can't attack units right next to it when it's in siege mode. And so you see that's why you send the Lings out to try to get on top of it, because then the siege tank will just die. It can't even attack the Zerglings that are on top of it. But the other thing we want to keep track of is the medevac count. So medevacs are another expensive unit that they heal up the bio and they can pick it up, right? So, you know, in a fight, right, the medevacs are really, really useful because they're constantly healing your units as they're taking damage, right? And so, but the medevacs are really mobile, right? And they fly. So what you want to do if you're the Zerg is you don't want to just kill the army, but you want to take out the medevacs. And if you're the Terran, you want to keep your medevacs kind of a little bit in the back, so that way even if you lose the fight, you still have all of your medevacs. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we see in this game, is just constantly sieging up this, I think it's the fourth base of Scarlet, right? A classic win condition in a really economically focused game between Zerg and Terran is for the Terran to try to keep denying the fourth base of the Zerg. In this case, that base actually has been mining for a long time, but we got another engagement here. It looked good for Scarlet initially, but now she's got to back up and try to fight outside of that thing, but Scarlet backs out. She knows that's just too many Marines and too many siege tanks, and Inna wins. And what I love about that game is that, unfortunately, Scarlet, who's probably my favorite player, lost. So that's not what I don't love about that game. But what I do love is that was classic innovation. Innovation is really known for what is called like a parade push. And what a parade push is like you like siege up your tanks like outside of an opponent's base, and you have like a bunch of Marines, and you're constantly fighting. And what you're doing is your units are parading across the map. So like whenever you make more Marines or more siege tanks, they're coming up to the front lines to fight, right? And it looks like, it's like when you look at it on the mini map, it's like a parade because they're all lined up like that. But innovation is like the master of the parade push, like better than any. It's a specifically Terran thing, a parade push, because of the way Terran's production works. But that was a good match. It really highlighted how good innovation is, because it is not easy to like sit there and like be on top of your macro game, like constantly making units right, and be sieging an opponent's base for like, that was like a really long prolonged fight, right? That was like 4 minutes of just like having siege tanks and Marines sitting outside of that fourth base of Scarlet. And that's why Scarlet lost, is because she was never able to really take control of that siege on the fourth base, and eventually she succumbed to it. While we're waiting for this game to heat up, you guys have any questions or anything?
Not right now.
We do have some cheese, but go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I don't have any questions right now. It's admittedly a little hard to kind of follow exactly what's going on, but I appreciate kind of your guidance through it.
Mm-hmm.
So Inno is cheesing in this game. He's building 2 barracks outside of his opponent's base, right? Remember we talked about with Kawine. Kawine built 1 barracks, right? And tried to do some damage. There's a big difference between 1 and 2. 2 costs a lot more. Now the question is Scarlet gonna scout this? She has an Overlord, and as we saw by the pathing there, the Overlord is moving over to scout Scarlet's base, or scout where Inno happens to be building this. Oh, but she moved it at the last moment. That's not good. That's no bueno. So, oh, but she did see that SCV. So she's paying attention. She's going to know that there's probably some buildings over there. Because that's not the natural way the SCV would come across the map. Like, those are like some of the really little things that you have to like kind of pay attention to. So it's really important to kill these SCVs or to distract them if you can. Because what the SCVs want to do is they want to build a bunker, right? And that, but 2v1, the drone's going to lose. So she has to back up. And now the first bunker is being built, and we see that there's already a Marine here. So this is hyper cheese, right? Inno has to do damage with this push. Scarlet is building a spine crawler in her thing, and she's got all these drones. She's moving them out. She's trying to get them to do it right. You normally wouldn't want your drones to be doing the damage, but really you just have to try to survive this moment. And so she killed the SCVs, which is good, which means no bunkers. And no bunkers means that those Marines are a lot more vulnerable. And so now she's moving out with the Zerglings. She's just trying to whittle down that Marine count. So now there's just 3 Marines there, and that's a lot of Lings. Inno is walling off back at home because the worst thing you can do as Terran right now is if you lose this fight, you may still be able to win the game. Yeah, Inno's giving up. So Inno's like, yep, I failed. Now, it doesn't mean that Inno is lost, but it means that Inno is behind now, just by a little bit.
Right, because he invested all of that into the cheese, and the cheese didn't work.
Exactly. Now, the thing to note is Terran is a very versatile race, and so we see here that he instantly starts building his second base. So like that's what that SCV was building right there. And he's actually scouting with the barracks, right, flying it over his opponent's base to look, which is pretty funny. But the difference is that if a Protoss or a Zerg were to do a similar style of cheese, they'd probably be out of the game if it failed. But Terran is so flexible that they can actually do some cheeses like that and still manage to play like a game. Like a very famous player named Maru, who is amazing. Maru is one of the best players ever. Also, is like basically on Inno's level in terms of success. But Maru very famously basically just did 2 racks every game. Like he basically did what Inno did like every single game. And if it failed, he's like, fine, I'll just play a macro game with you. But if it beat him, then it beat him, right? And so there Inno was trying to pull a fast one over Scarlet. It didn't work. So now he's a little behind. As we can see, Scarlet's up 5 workers at 4 minutes. That's pretty good. And she's up in regular supply by just a little bit. So we're gonna see if that failed cheese comes back to haunt innovation or not. But right now the game is kind of settling down a little bit. Scarlet's getting her 3rd base. We see another this has been a staple of all of our ZVTs, right? This 2 Hellions just kind of trying to do a little harass, trying to move around the map and trying to look at stuff. So we see here, so like a single building can give up a lot of what a player strategy is. Here we see that Innovation is building a fusion core. Now we saw a fusion core in Kawaii versus Rogue, and that indicated battle cruiser. And so we see again in the production tab, Inno is going for battle cruisers as well. This is a pretty popular strategy because Zerg has really bad anti-air. Basically, it's just those queens for in the early game at least. And so the idea is that you kind of hit them when only queens are their anti-air, and then they can't really deal with the battle cruisers as well. Because the queens are kind of slow, especially off creep. Does that make sense? Why you'd want to go for battle cruisers perhaps in the early game?
Yeah, it does.
And so Inno's going to stockpile probably, just like we saw with Kawaii, he's probably going to stockpile 2 battle cruisers. Because I think 2 battle cruisers can take out like 3 queens. I think it's often based on those little maths is like the way that you might approach a matchup. So like 1 battle cruiser probably is going to like lose to those 4 queens really quickly, but 2 might be able to take out the queens, or 2 might be able to finagle away where if they can catch a queen out by itself, they can just instantly win and stuff like that. But we'll see. If he only builds 1, then he's hoping to do a lot more damage with these Hellions and Marines. He is only building 1. Okay, that's interesting. Oh yeah, he teleported it in. And now so he's hoping to do some damage here. He's killed a drone or two, but I think this is actually the real damage dealer. You see those are Hellions. They turned into Hellbats, and so now they're hanging out in the front of the base. And I think that this is the real danger, is these Hellbats. But ooh, those Banelings connected and did a lot of damage. Oh, so the Hellbat actually is really weak to the Banelings, and you see like all those Hellbats lost. This has definitely been a failed push by Innovation, because he needed to do damage with those Hellbats or with the Battlecruiser, and he really didn't do damage with either one of them. And so now I think we can really safely say that Scarlet has taken a little bit of a lead, even though she's not ahead right now in supply. She's ahead in bases, and she's ahead in economy. And so, but Inno's actually getting up as third behind this. So Inno's not as behind as I insinuated just now. Second battlecruiser coming out. It was really, really important that Innovation did not lose that battlecruiser in that initial push, because the battlecruiser is really expensive. It takes like 2 minutes to build one battlecruiser. So it's not just expensive in terms of like resources like minerals and gas, but it's expensive in terms of time. You really can't be losing those, which he didn't. So now he's going to stockpile, it looks like 3, because he's got one in his main base, and he's got one kind of floating in the middle of the map. So he's going to get 3, and then I think he's going to do a push with those. Meanwhile, these Hellions are going to fly into the third and try to do a little bit of damage there. The Banelings are coming in. Ooh, there's a lot of Zerglings. So losing all those Hellions is really bad, right? Because the Hellions are the pressure, right? Like the Hellions almost matter more as an idea in Scarlet's head than they do as a unit on the map. Because as long as those Hellions were on the map, Scarlet has to be afraid, right? Like Hellions could just fly into my third at any moment and just roast all my workers, right? But now there's a big difference between like the Hellions coming in and doing no damage and the Hellions coming in doing no damage and getting killed. Now Scarlet doesn't have to worry about Hellions anymore. So that was actually a really important moment. Here we see that the battlecruisers right now are being used to clear out just some of the creep, because as we noted, the creep gives Zerg vision, and that vision is good. Look at all those queens. But those Yamato cannons, they take out 2 of the queens, but still, I think that's 7 is too many. The 2 battlecruisers can't take it out, and they're gonna have to retreat. All right, we got a little bit of a lull here. It looks like Inno is going for okay, so we see that Inno Scarlet is building corruptors, and corruptors are an air-to-air fighter, and they're really good. They're like a really strong air-to-air fighter. They're very good against these battlecruisers. So we see here, right, just these 3 corruptors are actually almost single-handedly taking out those battlecruisers, right? 2 of them ended up being at really low house, and then health, and then Inno had to teleport away. Again, Inno's losing more of those Hellions. Like, Hellions are really cheap, so it's not a huge deal. And here we see the SCVs are repairing those. It's not a huge deal for the Hellions to die, but it is setting Inno back, right? Scarlet's now at 10 supply. The worker count is about even, but Scarlet is on 4 bases, Inno's on 3, and so Scarlet's workers are more efficient, and Scarlet is getting higher in the tech tree. She's got these air-to-air fighters. She's getting her upgrades. Like, this is looking really good for Scarlet, I would say, at this point. Yeah, those the battlecruising strategy hasn't really worked out. They just haven't done very much damage. Like, as I noted before with, I think it was in the Rogue versus Quine games, when you push out, you can't just kill your opponent's army when you're fighting Terran versus Zerg. You really have to do economic damage, right? Take out a base, take out a bunch of workers. And these battlecruisers have not done that. They've put on a little bit of pressure on Scarlet. They forced her down a certain path, right? She's definitely investing more in anti-air, but they're not dictating the pace of the game. They're not slowing the Zerg's economy down, which is what they need to be doing. So here we see the battle cruisers are now kind of doing a little sneaky flyby down the corners of the map, hoping to perhaps get on top of one of those bases and take out some workers. So we'll see. They are now on Scarlet's minimap, so we'll see how Scarlet responds. This base maybe won't be able to. Oh, but all the corruptors are here, so she's gonna have to teleport. Or Inno's gonna have to teleport away. Oh, loses one of the battle cruisers. That's pretty important. As we noted, they take a long time to build. So,
so do you think that still has the same impact, even though the battle cruisers haven't been terribly efficient?
You mean the killing of the battle cruisers?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like the killing of the Hellions, where it's one less thing Scarlet has to worry about. Now there's only 2. 2 is a lot more manageable than 3. Because they're such big bulky units, right? And so but you're right, you are right that they haven't done much damage, and for a while now Inno's been moving into a different tech tree. In fact, if Scarlet loses this game, I think we can actually pretty safely say that a reason why she could lose this game is because she's been building all those corruptors, which are air-to-air fighters, and Inno is mostly transitioned out of air game, right? He hasn't built any more battle cruisers. He hasn't built any air units at all. And so those air-to-air fighters, like which we see on the screen right now, they're not going to do anything. Right now, and we see Inno actually gets a harass that kills 13 workers, so now Inno takes a good 10 supply lead, which is really good. There's fights all over the map. You can see that the observer for the GSL is actually having trouble keeping up with it all. There's a fight in the middle of the map. There's some harass that Zerg is doing here. It looks like actually Scarlet is sacrificing, sacrificing those. He doesn't really care if they live or die anymore. So you're totally right. Like, they've served their purpose, the battle cruisers, and now they're not as useful. But now look at all those corruptors. They can't do anything except die.
It's interesting because like that tone shift is what I find most interesting about these long form StarCraft matches, where you have to do a form of, or kind of like a reaction to whatever's going on. So, with my limited experience playing Terran, I would say, those battle cruisers, like, they wreck. They're a good investment. But obviously, for whatever reason, they're not being very efficient here. So Inno has the additional responsibility of saying, okay, so not only is my strategy not working, but I have to figure out what will work in a way that possibly he didn't expect.
Yeah, exactly. And because StarCraft players play so many games every single day, it's very likely that Inno has been in this situation before, right? And so he's like kind of using that experience to his advantage. But this is definitely a long macro game. So it's funny because remember before we were playing games where it was attack at 10 minutes, right? And we see that like I would consider this a long game, and we're at 13 minutes in, right? Like, so StarCraft is, games can go pretty quick. So I want to talk about 2 units that Scarlet has been building that we haven't talked too much about, which are Swarm Hosts and Nidus Worms. So Swarm Hosts are this really cool unit. I think we talked about them a little bit on stream when we were playing before. They spawn little locusts, which are really powerful fighters, but the Swarm Hosts themselves can't attack anything. They just, they only spawn units. And then we've also got the Nidus Network. What the Nidus Network is it's like you basically, in crass terms, the butthole of the Nidus Network is in the nice. You build it. It's right there. It's in the middle of the screen. It's like you can move units into the Nidus Network, and then you build a Nidus Worm, which is the head of the worm, somewhere in the map, and then you can actually teleport your units across the map as Zerg. And so we've seen that Scarlet has been trying to build that, but it hasn't worked out because Inno keeps scouting the network and killing the head before units can come out of it. But it's a good way to harass a Zerg, especially in these long drawn out games. So there's a head of the worm right there. So this game has kind of slowed down a little bit. We've had a lot of little skirmishes kind of in the middle of the map, but not a lot of economic damage. And we see that I would say that no player has a real true advantage at this point. The only advantage I would give is probably Scarlet has a little bit more upgrades right now. And so upgrades become really important in these big battles, right? Upgrades, what I mean by that is she has +2 melee attack, +2 ranged attack on her units and stuff like that. So that means that her ranged attacks and her units do just a little bit more damage every time they attack. But that adds up. So here we see that the Banelings come in and they're really wrecking. They just did a lot of damage, but Inno just actually remakes all that supply right away. And so they both have kind of weird comps for facing each other. Like I would say that neither of them are like really countering the other so much. So like Inno's got all these cyclones. And cyclones are good against kind of they're pretty good units, but they're mostly good against like I would say here we see those are the locusts, right? The swarm hosts. So the swarm hosts spawn those locusts, throw them in, and then run away. And every time the Zerg or Scarlet does that, it actually it expands, like it's kind of like a lead. So here we see that they're back, those battle cruisers. But it looks like they might have finally died, but we might. Ooh, this actually is not looking great for Scarlet. She's being attacked on multiple fronts, and it doesn't look like she can handle it. She just lost a base, and yeah, those battle cruisers are a nice trophy, but they're not gonna win you the game, you know. Oh wow, and look at that. See, like Terran's just got another army here. Ino is so good at macro. Like, it's like every time there's like an engagement and you're like, oh man, finally Ino's army is gonna be cleared up, and then he's just got another army like waiting to go. This is
the kind of like organization necessary for that is mind-blowing.
Yeah. So Ino wins there. So what happened near the end there is that I think that Scarlet was a little bit slow on the draw to reacting to what Ino was doing. And so Ino like kind of built up this really big cyclone force, and I think cyclones, there were better units to build against that than Zerglings and Banelings. It just felt like Scarlet didn't have the unit composition to beat that. All right, so let's go on to our next game. 134-37. Okay. So this is Ino versus Rogue, right? Because Rogue won the other game and Ino won the other game, and we're about halfway done. So before we dive into this game, any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, I think the only thought that I have though is sometimes it's hard for me to hear you personally. Like even though I have the volume on the game turned down, hearing the other announcers kind of makes it hard for me to follow you.
Oh,
but that just might be a me thing.
Just mute it.
True.
It's muted on.
Okay,
it's muted on stream. I didn't know that me adjusting the volume didn't adjust your volume, which I guess makes sense. But yes, I will say that
I'm sitting here just like watching. I was like,
I will say that Tastosis, which is the Artosis and Tasteless, the two people casting, are way better at this than I am. But our purposes are a little bit different. Like, I'm just trying to explain the basics of the game and like the competition of this specific matchup, whereas they're providing like a little bit more of like an entertaining product and talking about like the nuances of each individual move. But they're great. They're the best casters in any sport. But, you know, in my opinion, they're amazing. I watched anything they cast. They're also extremely funny. But yeah, I would definitely recommend do not try to listen to them and me at the same time.
Yeah, I was doing that and I was like, this isn't working.
Yeah.
That's like intense multitasking though.
Well, let's go ahead and we'll watch Ino versus Rogue. So this is kind of interesting because Rogue beat Kawaii in a ZVT, and Ino beat Scarlet in a TVZ, right? So like they both just won this matchup against somebody else, right? And so one thing that you can do is you could look at this and be like, well, you could like, if you were sitting in the audience, right, you're Rogue, you're like, oh, so that's what he does against Scarlet. Okay, well then I guess I'm gonna have to, you know, I know how to counter that, right? Like you might be thinking that in the back of your head, right? Like that was the strategy they used against that other Zerg, so now I'm gonna adjust in that way. That makes this a little bit more of an interesting series because they both had the opportunity to see the other one play this matchup, right? And so now they might be thinking a little bit, oh, that's how you play this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I would have thought that they wouldn't be able to watch each other for that reason. But as I'm thinking about it, that's not really a thing in other esports. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's not really a thing in any sports, right? But here we see Ino's got our favorite flavor of the day, some cheese. So what makes this cheese is like one Rax is like, okay, it's just a pressure build, but we know he's gonna go for 2 because he sent out a second SCV. Ooh, and so this is really, really important. I'm gonna actually pause the video. So Rogue went hatch first, right? He built a base before he built the unit, or built the building that can allow him to build any military units. Meanwhile, Inno is cheesing him, right? He's building 2 racks right next to the opponent's base. And so Rogue is already behind, right? At this moment, Rogue is like behind because Rogue is going to need army units as soon as possible. And he's building another base before he builds those army units. But he does have this Overlord, and so the question is, will the Overlord see this? So the Overlord, it's like this creeping vision. It's like, isn't? I don't think he is actually. So, but it's floating over.
God, this is so tense, though.
It's not gonna see it, I don't think. Oh, no. So it is actually very possible, and this is what I was talking about before with like the league play and having weeks to prepare. It is very possible that Inno actually scouted Rogue, watched a bunch of Rogue games, and saw where he puts his overlords and said, your overlords always stop right there and don't scout the back behind these minerals. I'm gonna build my barracks there. You know what I mean? Like, that is very possibly what like Inno is thinking right now, right? Like, it is.
Dude, that's wild, but I can totally see it.
Like, you know, that's called, you know, if you can get those little edges over your opponent, that can be the difference between winning and losing the game. Because scouting, like the difference between scouting a 2-Rax proxy and not scouting a 2-Rax proxy, that's a really big deal. Note that, and again, regarding what we were just talking about, Inno did this same build against Scarlet, right? 2 racks outside of the base, and a bunker goes down. And so we're gonna see if Rogue is as prepared as Scarlet was. Already the workers are coming out later, like, but that's a lot of workers. The nice thing that you can do is you can actually send a lot of workers down because they can just go back to work at the second base, right? So you're not losing as much mining time. But here, oh, is the racks gonna finish? Or is the bunker gonna finish? Because like that's like the end of the game. So yeah, so we see here what oh, the bunker finishes. So now you see what the drones are doing. They're trying to block off the Marines from getting into the bunker. That was a good surround, and we've got some Zerglings in here now. Even if Rogue manages to defend this is bad. Like, look at 5 workers go down. Ooh, Inno is up 5 workers against right now, and he was the one who cheesed. So that is not good. So the bunker is taking a lot of damage. So but still, this is, yeah. So I would say, like, yes, that cheese did not kill the opponent, right? It didn't kill Rogue, but it gave Inno a big lead. Inno is up 5 workers now, and is up in army supply. The only way that Inno is behind right now is that his production facilities are, of course, across the map, right? They have to float home before he can make more workers. And so if you don't do damage, it's actually funny. You know what the best way to respond to this is, if your opponent doesn't leave after doing no damage, is to build a bunch of stuff and go attack them. And I think that's really funny because, right, a bunch of Inno's production is flying in the sky right now. I love the scouting barracks. Like, build this huge building and just use it to fly over your opponent's base.
I know, I love that so much. Just don't mind me.
I'm just making sure you're not doing anything too funky. So here, it looks like Rogue's gonna be taking a 3rd base. Inno is taking a 2nd base. So we're settling into a more macro-oriented game, but I would say Inno currently has the lead. Oh, did you see what Inno was gonna do there? It ended up not working, but Inno was actually gonna land the barracks where the 3rd would go. So that way, Rogue would have had to kill the barracks in order to build his 3rd base, which would have been pretty funny. But ultimately, Rogue built the 3rd before Inno could get there. Ooh, so we've got, what is that, a Widowmine drop? Oh, it's a Hellion drop. Okay. So in this medevac, there are 4 Hellions, right? And we've seen a lot of Hellions, right? The little race cars that shoot fire out of their heads. So what Inno's hoping to do is he's hoping to do some harass. So this is like, I'm gonna pause it for a sec because this is why Inno is so fucking good. Like, Inno just failed that cheese, right? And that was light cheese, right? That's cheddar cheese. That wasn't very sharp, right? But But Inno, like, Inno actually, I said failed. I mean, Inno didn't win with that cheese, right? But Inno isn't content to just go into a macro game, right? Inno's like, okay, you survived round 1, barely. Welcome to round 2. I'm gonna drop a bunch of Hellions in your base and go roast all your workers. And so, like, but Inno was definitely already planning this move out. And we see those bombers, those banshees, he's got them queued up in the production queue. So like, this is a nightmare for Rogue, like, right? It's never gonna end, right? This is what Terran can do so well. And so 4 Hellions fly in, and it's roasting time. There's 2 workers already. There's 4 workers. There's 6 workers. That's 9 workers. So Rogue was already down, and now pick them all up. You didn't lose a single fucking Hellion. Like, that's so good. Jesus. And he's got the bomber coming out, right? This Banshee is going to come out, and the Banshee will have cloak too. So the Banshee is like this, it's like a vibe check on the Zerg, because Zerg doesn't have a lot of detection, and the Banshee, if you get an upgrade, can become invisible. Now, let me put it this way: if your opponent has an invisible unit and you can't deal with it, you are going to lose the match, right? If you can't see an invisible unit, it will kill everything you have, right? And it's like a vibe check, because what Inno's doing is he's saying, okay, I harassed you with the 2 racks, I harassed you with the Hellions. Do you have detection, right? If you don't, I'm just gonna kill you right here, right? Because he's keeping Rogue so busy. And so here, unfortunately, the Hellions aren't able to do any more damage, but the Hellions have already paid for themselves. Those 9 workers, that's an absurd amount of damage to do. It's a lot of damage. And so here, Rogue is trying to do a little bit of scouting by sending in that Overlord. It looks like Inno is going to do the pool to Banshees that we saw him do against Scarlet, where and because 2 Banshees, like I said, can one-shot a worker, right? Which is actually a really big deal in terms of being able to get damage done quickly. It's literally twice as fast. So here, the Hellions are kind of just skirting around the base, keeping Rogue busy. And again, like we noted, right, the purpose of those Hellions there is to say, like, your queens are going to have to come to the front to defend this, and then the Banshees are going to be in back doing damage, like once the queens are out of position. So he pulls up the 2 Banshees, and he's going to send them in now. And so, Rogue has had to spend so much of this game just remaking drones. And meanwhile, Innovation has been teching up. He's way ahead technologically, and they're pretty even right now in terms of workers. So, all right, so we already got 2 workers, and there's no detection. Oh, there is detection. Never mind. I'm stupid. I didn't see it right away. I thought that was the building icon, but that was the reposition. So he gets 4 more workers. 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, 8 more workers. Like, that's a lot of workers. So if we count up the 2 harasses, they killed 17 workers between them. And 22 workers total, because with the initial one. So remember what I said early on, right? In this matchup, and ZVT, the Terran has to slow down the Zerg, right? In some way, right? Definitely Innovation has done that this game. Really impressively, by the way. All right, and does lose one. So there was our first real misstep by Inno, right? He sent those Banshees in and probably wasn't looking at them, and the Queens managed to take it out. Unfortunately, they already paid for themselves, right? They did a lot of damage.
Yeah, I feel like even though he lost one of the units, it won't really make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't make me go back to LA.
I don't care where you go, Bojack, but
So I guess from like a kind of competitive spectator perspective, that's something that I find kind of interesting, especially maybe for people like Kelly and I that haven't played the game very much. Kelly, how do you feel watching all the different actions? And I don't know how you feel about it, but what I feel is that I have a really hard time distinguishing what actions will make some kind of lasting impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. Like, for me, I mean, I've been upfront this whole time. I'm not looking for the lasting impact when playing this game. I'm just trying to get through the tech trees and kind of just build and expand. So I didn't even consider, like the area units. I like them. They're cool. They're fairly high up the tech tree for someone who just started. Whereas like if there's no air-to-air combat, then they're functionally useless, but I would still want to make them. But it's interesting to see, like, because you were talking earlier, Eric, about how there were so many battles going on at once that even the announcers were having trouble keeping up with it, and I just can't even. I could barely handle building stuff while having one battle in mind, not multiple. So it's just kind of a level of gameplay that I can't even fathom at this point.
Yeah, the multitasking is really immense. Like, and that's what I think. That's what I love about Starcraft, is that like Starcraft is a game about attention. It's like, where are you looking on the map? What are you doing? Are you macroing? Are you microing your armies? There's two battles going on. Are you able to do that, both of those at the same time? And I think that because of that, Starcraft cannot be played perfectly, right? It's not like chess where, like, you know, like it really is a tactile game. I think one of my favorite streamers for Starcraft content, his name is Day9, and I think he said it best. He had this long discussion a couple years ago about Starcraft. I think it was Starcraft 1, and he basically like made the point that some people might feel that like you have to learn how to build a big army, or learn how to spread your creep, or learn how to scout correctly in order to get to the real game of Starcraft. But in reality, and what makes Starcraft great is that is the game, right? Just like how dribbling, right? You don't have to learn to dribble to play basketball. Dribbling is part of basketball, right? Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, dribbling is basketball. In the same way, making units, right? And like macroing two armies at once, or, learning how to do some cool trick with your Reapers and the bombs that they throw. That is Starcraft, right? You don't have to learn that to then be able to begin to play the game, right? You learn that because it is part of the game.
Like all of that is processual.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The dribbling example, I think, is really useful, because it's not. You don't have to be a master at dribbling to be even half decent at basketball, but it is undoubtedly a core component of the physical actions that make up the game. Exactly.
And so if you're like playing StarCraft, you can just pick one skill and be like, I'm gonna get really good at this, right? I'm gonna get really good at those mutalisks, right? Those flying units that we saw Scarlet make, I think, in game 2. And you can just be like, I'm gonna make mutalisks, and I'm gonna learn how to be really good at using those, right? And like, you can, and that's what I love about Starcraft, is like you can choose that kind of like level of detail of like, this is the thing I'm gonna get good at, right? This is the thing I'm gonna practice. And you don't, and like sometimes people will come onto forums and stuff like thinking that like they have to like learn a build in order to learn how to play StarCraft, or that learning how to play StarCraft is knowing that Banelings beat Marines, right? And learning, and you know what I mean, and being like, so once I get good enough, I can then build Banelings to beat Marines. But that's never the case, right? Like, it's always more complicated than that. I think that's what makes StarCraft really interesting to me, is that there's just so many different skills one can learn and utilize. And that level, there's such a high level of expression. Like I was saying this earlier, and you guys haven't, been watching the GSL for 10 years like I have, but I've watched Innovation play probably like 50 to 100 games, right? Like, I've watched Innovation so much, so I know how good Innovation is. Same thing with Rogue. I've watched probably 100 Rogue games, but I know that Innovation is really good at the parade push in a way that no other player is, right? Like, that is what Innovation is known for. So like, I can watch a game and be like, there's Innovation doing his fucking parade push, you know what I mean? Like, and like, get it, you know what I mean? And I think that like a lot of games, like, that's what makes an esport really excellent to me. Like, I know a lot of times on the show we don't talk about like excellency, right, or what makes something great, but that's what makes StarCraft great to me, is that like, even though all the players have this, there's only 3 races and all the players have the same tools at their disposal, but what they do with those tools are so vastly different, right? And they're like, players have such distinct personalities. Like, probably one of my favorite players of all time, my favorite Terran of all time, is Beyond, who sadly is now serving his military time in Korea because they have mandatory military service. But like I said earlier in the stream, like in 2016, Beyond became world champion with this mass Reaper strategy. Reaper is not a unit that was traditionally that you would build the backbone of like an army on, but Beyond would be just like, I'm just gonna build a ton of Reapers and kill you. And like, no one else has ever really done it in the way that Beyond did it, right? And I think that's what makes StarCraft such an amazing game to me.
Word.
Let's keep watching this game. So Inno is harassing Rogue really well. Inno's got a big supply league of 150 to 105, and like we noted, everything that came before has influenced where we are in this match. So though Rogue is going to maybe, oh no, Rogue GG's out. So yeah, like I noted, so you could look at that moment and be dumb. And you know what being dumb would be? Being dumb would say, Zerglings aren't good enough against siege tanks. I just lost this game because those siege tanks killed my whole army, right? Or Marines and medevacs are too strong because they just killed my base and I couldn't kill them. But really what happened in this game, right? It's that Innovation was constantly harassing Rogue, and Rogue just did not have enough at the end of the game, right? It wasn't really about are siege tanks good or Marines good. It was really that Innovation just outplayed Rogue in the early game. He proxied those 2 racks, he dropped those Hellions, he had those Banshees, and every single one of those 3 moves did immense damage to Rogue, so that when the parade push did come, it was over. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All right, so we'll go on to our next match. Maybe I can I speed it up? I'm wondering. No, I don't think I can. It's okay. We should be starting soon. I'm wondering if one of the players requested a bathroom break or anything. I'm just gonna skip ahead. There we go. All right. So Innovation's doing it again.
There he goes.
He's got those 2 SCVs. And so the thing is with Terran, and there is a cost to this. You know what I mean? You don't just, it's not free to build 2 racks outside of your opponent's base, right? You're slowing down your own economy. If it does no damage, you lose. Hatch first again. Rogue, old man, when you gonna learn your lesson? This is this fucking repeat of game 1, right? Rogue hatch firsts, and Inno builds 2 racks right outside of his base. The question is, this time it looks like the Overlord is gonna spot it, right? And remember that every second matters. So before, Rogue didn't know about the Marines, I think, until the SCV was building a bunker, right? And then he had to pull his workers. But Rogue is going to have a lot easier time getting ready if he knows about it before the barracks are even done, right? Before a single Marine has come out of them. And so, there it is. So, that look on Rogue's face, he's like, fine. God damn it. Oh my god, that's...
So here's the question, because Innovation's done this every time. Does he just cheese nearly every time?
No, what I was saying before is that the cost is kind of low here. So because Terran can float their buildings, and because Terran can wall off, and Zerg's early game is Zerglings, which are melee units, it's pretty easy. It's in this particular matchup, it is if the cheese doesn't do very much damage, Inno can go on to play a standard game. Generally speaking, he'll be a little behind if he doesn't do any damage. But does that make sense of does that answer your question a little bit? Even though it might be predictable, which is it is predictable because Maru does it every fucking game. I love Maru, he's amazing, but Maru really popularized this particular strategy, and so it's looking not that good. He did have more time to prepare, Rogue did, so the Zerglings and the Queen were out a little bit quicker to help deal with this, so it wasn't just the drones, and it looks like Rogue's gonna clean this up, and that's a lot. And it's worth noting that I think Inno actually made more Marines than he did last time. So if we look, but the thing is you gotta look at everything once the dust settles, because it looks like Rogue kind of defended that, and then you look back at home and Inno has 21 workers and Rogue is 15, and it was 13 just a second ago. And so the one good thing is that for Zerg, like I noted before, Terran has to build workers 1 at a time, which means if you destroy a bunch of workers, it's really bad because Terran has to build them 1 at a time. Zerg can build workers 5 at a time, and so we see that Rogue is already up to 21 workers, so he's catching up pretty fast because the cheese is over. And so But it is similar to last game where I think the cheese did enough damage to slow down the Zerg a little. But the thing is, we have to remember is last game, Inno didn't win just because he did a lot of damage with that early, with the early 2 racks. Inno won because he did a lot of damage with the Hellion drop and with the Banshees afterwards, right? He did 3 really good harasses that killed 5 to 10 workers every single time, right? And so Rogue actually defended better this time, is up in supply already, as up by 5 workers. So Rogue definitely defended better this time. And it was, and you know what the crucial moment was the fact that the Overlord did scout the barracks, right? He had a little bit more time to prepare. And that ends up and that's what StarCraft is, right? StarCraft can be a game of seconds, right? And so in this case, 15 more seconds to prepare for the cheese, the 2 racks, that made all the difference. So here we've got we've got Inno kind of doing the same thing he did in Scarlet Game 2. He's building a fusion core and he's going to go for battle cruisers again. So what I think makes this day of StarCraft kind of good is that we're seeing the same strategies being implemented in multiple games, which I think is useful for you guys. So you guys are starting to see what I see when I see StarCraft, right? Which is these patterns, right? Being able to say okay, Inno's doing the same thing he did or something really similar that he did to Scarlet in game 2. And so we can see now how is Rogue going to respond that's different than Scarlet, because Scarlet lost that game, right? She dealt with the battle cruisers okay, but she ended up losing overall. But I'm going to pause it one more time just to talk about a little bit of fluidity. So a question you may have on your mind is, why is Inno building battle cruisers here? And I think a key reason that we can help to kind of explain that is that in order for Terran to build a factory, they need to have a barracks. And in order for them to build a starport, they need to build a factory, right? That's the tech tree, right? And just to give you guys a quick background, what do you do when you go 2 racks and it doesn't immediately kill the opponent? You actually build a factory at home to wall off. That way your opponent can't send the Zerglings across the map and kill all your workers. Because if you have a wall there, they can't get in. Well, if you already got the factory, you can build the starport right away, right? And then if you've got the starport and your barracks are floating around the map, you can't build Marines or anything. So building a battle cruiser, if we're thinking about it from an intuitive standpoint, makes sense because you don't have very much production at home, so you don't have very many ways to spend all your minerals and gas. So that makes the battle cruiser more appealing because you just need 1 starport, right, in order to build a battle cruiser. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So we can see that there's a natural fluid kind of relationship between what happened before and what's happening now. And that's an important thing to understand, I think, when you're watching StarCraft 2, is that everything is building up on what happened last minute, right? We're at minute 5, but what's happening at minute 5 and 6 is completely informed by what happened in minute 2 and 3. And so I want to try to draw those lines when I can. Chat has been remarkably silent today. I get 2 monitors. Yeah. I'm finally able to have chat up, and they don't even care.
Let them know.
I've had it up this whole time as well. I've been checking in intermittently.
All right, so here Inno tries to push in with some Hellions. They don't get too much damage done, but again, that's that vibe check, right? If your queens are out of position and those Hellions drive in, they just roast all the workers, just like that. I think he might have got 1 worker there. So the Zerglings are here. Oh, the battlecruiser comes up. Now, as I noted before, 3 queens I think beat 1 battlecruiser, but the thing is, there's the Hellions there. Okay, maybe 3 queens don't beat a battlecruiser because, okay, woof. So those Hellions have been wreaking havoc. So 7 workers go down. Worker count is even now, 43 to 43, which it favors innovation just slightly. That's a lot of workers to go down. So we see that Rogue instantly remakes 7 workers. But the thing is, all those workers could be army units if they didn't die. And so now we see that's kind of what I was just talking about. Now Inno's building a ton of Marines, right? So now that the barracks are back home, he can, and rebuilt, he can go do that. I would say that Inno has taken a little bit of a lead because Rogue took a lot of economic damage from those Hellions early on in the game. And what makes Terran so deadly is that when your opponent pushes you and does damage, the natural thing you want to do in StarCraft is counterattack, right? Because your opponent just lost some army, maybe you can go do damage with yours. But with Terran, you can wall off. You can place your buildings in a way that the Zerg can't get in. And that makes counterattacking not very viable. And that's why Innovation is able to do these pushes so effortlessly, right? Without any real consequences other than losing the units in the push. Like he lost all those Hellions, right? Whoa. So the observer just noted this, but Rogue just built 11 workers. So Rogue just took a bet. Rogue said, you know what? You're not going to build... you're not going to attack me for like the next 5 minutes. And so Rogue is really droning up, so to speak. He's just building a ton of drones, and he's going to try to get his economy back online, so that way he can better, in the long term, build an army. But we see that this isn't a parade push yet, but we see that Innovation's pushing out with another army, and Innovation's calling Rogue's bluff, right? Because Rogue just bet, like I just described. He built a ton of workers, right? And this is the thing about with Zerg that I want to make clear. Zerg has to pick between workers or army. Whenever they build workers, they're not building army. Whenever they're building armies, they're not building workers. And so because Rogue just built all those workers, his army is a little bit neutered. And so we're going to see, Rogue was saying, like, you're not going to attack me right now, and I'm going to take a bet that you aren't. But because Inno is, he might just roll over Rogue and win this game. But we'll see. I'm rooting for Rogue, even though I don't know the outcome of this match, but I know the outcome of the series. Because this aired in March. I don't think I've said that, but this is like an early round. And so here, oh, GG. Yep, the army was too big, right? So again, we can see at the very end there, you could say like Marines are so good, they just killed that guy, but really everything that came before it informed what happened. And so that's our last ZV2 that we're gonna watch for today, because we're gonna skip Scarlet versus Kawayan, because I want to get to the last game, which is Rogue versus Scarlet wins against Kawayan, by the way. So we're gonna have our last match, but
spoiler alert.
But we've watched 3 ZVT series, and I hope you guys got a feel for that series. Like, you're not gonna know everything, but I think what the main takeaways I want to show you is that each matchup has its own flair and its own unique style. And in ZVT, we can see that the Terran is going to try to harass, right, and deal damage to the Zerg, right, early on. And in the one where we saw where the Zerg won, which was against Rogue versus Kawayan, we saw that Rogue won by really defending all of that stuff really well and then taking a lead. But we see, again, with Innovation versus Scarlet and Inno versus Rogue, that if the Terran can do enough damage early on, they can slow down the Zerg to win with a big push later. And so I hope you guys got a little bit of a feel for what ZVT is like. I think it's my favorite matchup in StarCraft 2. But now let's go to 246 for what is a lot of people's least favorite matchup in StarCraft. But I like all the matchups. But Zerg versus Zerg. So now we have a different matchup, right? Which means everything we've been talking about for the last hour and a half, take it. I want you to take it. I want you to crumple it up on a piece of paper and throw it in the trash, because it no longer matters, right? Because Zerg versus Zerg is a completely different ball game. Just for one example, Banelings are amazing in Zerg versus Zerg, because one Baneling kills a Zergling. And but not just a Zergling, right? But any amount of Zerglings that are in its little radius, right? In its explosion, a Baneling will kill all of them. What that means is that Zerg versus Zerg is an incredibly volatile matchup, right? Because if one Baneling exploding can decide an entire fight, right? Like, you've got just a crazy possibilities. So Zerg versus Zerg is often the scrappiest matchup in all of StarCraft 2, because like players are constantly having to micro all of these different units, all these Zerglings and Banelings, and that's typically what it comes down to, Zerglings and Banelings. It can be Roach v Roach as well, and Roach is this really tanky armored unit, and it's a very different fight, whereas the Zerg versus the Zergling and Baneling fights are like played on a knife's edge, like one Baneling hit decides everything. Roach versus Roach is like this really slow thing, because like they're kind of, it's kind of like do you guys know the term wet noodle fight?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a wet noodle fight because like the Roach isn't a very good offensive unit. It's a good defensive unit. And so what we're going to see here is that we're going to watch the series between Rogue and Scarlet, and we'll see how ZVZ is. I hope what you'll get at the end of this little short series between them is how different of a feel a different matchup will have. So ZVT has a very particular feeling to it, a particular narrative that we could see in kind of developing in every match. Like it was pretty similar. Let's see how Zerg versus Zerg plays out. So Rogue does start with a similar to last time. Oh no, that's Scarlet. So Scarlet went spawning pool first. What that means is that she might be looking to put on a little bit of aggression, but she did build a hatch, so she's not going like full on all out cheese. Meanwhile, Rogue, it looks like, built hatch first. And so I'm gonna pause it for just a sec. So in any mirror matchup, right, because they're both Zerg, we can already start to see any differences in their build as now we're seeing who's coming ahead. So if you build spawning pool first, that builds army units, right? If you build hatchery first, that boosts your economy. Since Scarlet went spawning pool first, it's more important for her to do any early damage than it is for Rogue to, because Rogue is going to have a second base up, is going to have more workers up, and have a bigger economy a little bit faster than Scarlet is. And as we've noted, at the 5-minute mark, things that happened at the 1-minute mark still matter. And so Rogue could possibly compound that early lead a little bit. But it looks like Scarlet might be doing something a little cheeky, because Scarlet is not building workers. She's at 11 workers and Rogue is at 18. What that signals to me is, yeah, she's going for early speed. So there's a really important upgrade. I'm just going to try to explain a little bit of the matchup just to make sure you guys are on the same page. So you see in the top left corner, there's like that final thing, those two little needles shooting out. That's upgrading. That's Zergling speed. Zerglings are not very good units, but if they don't have speed. And speed Zerglings will really easily cruise by and destroy non-speed Zerglings. So we can tell Scarlet is cheesing this fucker. She's building 6 Zerglings. She's pooling them up right now, and she's going to wait till they get speed, and she's going to rush them across the map and attack Rogue with them. More than 6 Zerglings. She's got 6 in production right now, but she's already built a couple. So she's gonna rush out with these lings. And so one thing that's really interesting, I want to note. I'm gonna pause it one more time. Rogue moved his Overlord over, and he saw that the hatchery had just finished. His hatchery's been done for like 30 seconds, so he knows that something's up, right? That she did not go hatch first like he did. All right, we've got all these Zerglings. How many Zerglings is she gonna make before she sends them out? 12 more Zerglings in production. Only 11 workers. She has half the workers of Rogue, so she has to do damage with these Zerglings in order to win this game. Speed is gonna be done in about 3 or 4 seconds. And once speed is done, you're gonna see. I hope, yeah, they'll start moving a lot faster. I hope that it's on the screen. Well, they'll eventually show it, but the Zerglings are way faster and a way more potent threat. There you go. See how much faster they are than they were before? And so there's 24 lings and they're rushing in, and Rogue doesn't have very much. So she's going to rush in. She's going to surround the queens. Gets one of the queens, gets 2 of the queens. This is looking really good for Scarlet. She's going to try to take out those defense structures. And she's gonna move up and to try to take out this drone line. And it's just Rogue is just not ready. He just does not have anything here. And so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Rogue's dead. There we go. And that's some real cheese.
That was brutal.
So what makes that a little different than what we saw in our last matchup between ZVT is that when Inno was doing the 2 racks, he didn't need to kill the opponent to win the game. There, Scarlet was down half the workers, right? Scarlet, actually, at the very end there, it was almost 30 to 10 workers, right? You're looking at somebody who can triple your income, right? There's no way you win that game if it goes long. So Scarlet had to do a lot of damage with that attack, and she wins, right? And that's what makes Cheese so potent, right? Is Rogue just was not prepared. And Scarlet there, she's got that cheeky smile. She's laughing. She knows that she just kind of cheated at Rogue out of a win, like, right? And this is the thing about StarCraft that's also really beautiful that I like, is that like here we see like we've seen some, in a, like, you could beat somebody in like a 20-minute game, right? Like take a lot of time and be like, yeah, I beat you in a straight up macro game. You can also beat somebody in 3 minutes, right? And I think that that's a really exciting, like, right, difference between StarCraft and most other sports, right? Most other sports you have to play the whole game or whatever, right? You have to play 60 minutes of basketball. In StarCraft, you're like, I'm gonna beat you in 3 minutes and you can't stop me. So Scarlett's thinking about what she wants to do next. Rogue is probably you're really hoping she cheeses again?
Yep.
We'll see. But yeah, you gotta imagine you're Rogue. This has got to be pretty frustrating. Rogue is, former world champ, GSL champ, one of the greatest players of all time. He's playing against Scarlet, and there's definitely some Korean pride on the line, right? Like Koreans don't like to lose to foreigners, generally speaking. Like, in interviews and stuff, like they'll say like, gotta defend the country or defend Korean pride over being the best StarCraft country. And so Rogue is probably a little upset right now. So we got another ZVZ, and we can already tell that Scarlet is gonna cheese because Scarlet isn't building workers. If you look down at the bottom, it's 11 to 13. That's not because Scarlet is bad, right? Or Scarlet doesn't know how to make workers, right? She just built a spawning pool right away, and she's not building any more workers. So she is definitely cheesing once again. So now the question is Rogue gonna build a hatch first? This is really important. If Rogue goes spawning pool first, he might have a chance. He goes hatch first again. So this is the day of Rogue going hatch first and getting fucked for it. So
Oh.
It's like when you lose in rocks, paper, scissors so many times that you just keep doing the same one because you're afraid that the time that you change from rock to scissors, they'll rock you back.
Yes, exactly. It's not, it's worth noting that, oh my gosh, and she's sending the drones with. So this is different than last time she waited for speed and then she went. This time she's like, I'm going to send all my workers to attack you with my Zerglings. She's leaving like very little behind. So she's like basically saying, I'm going to kill you with this push, right? This is the cheese of all cheeses. It's when you pull the boys, right? Those workers aren't at home no more. They're a fighting force. And so note that the Overlord, Rogue's Overlord, did see this. So Rogue knows it's coming. But Rogue's spawning pool isn't done, and bam, bam, bam. So I want to know, what is Scarlet building here? So you guys have an idea. Those are spine crawlers. Those are supposed to be defensive structures, right? They can only be built on creep. And this is, again, the matchup, right? So, but they can only be built on creep, which means that they can't be built in your opponent's base in the other matchups. But in Zerg versus Zerg, your opponent has creep too. So you can build spine crawlers in your opponent's base. And so we see 3 of them come down right now. And now it's, it's worth noting that Rogue does have more workers than Scarlet does. So like technically Rogue might have a bigger fighting force, but he doesn't have the Zerglings in there. And so now they're doing this dance, right? Rogue wants to get us around with the thing, with the drones. Meanwhile, Scarlet, what she wants to do is, and she's playing so dirty, but what she wants to do is she wants those spine crawlers to finish right up there, those defense structures. And now look, now they're gonna start, those little giraffe heads are gonna be poking down at everything, right?
Harley.
And so she's trying to set them up in between the bases there, because that way they can hit. If they can hit both bases, then Rogue can't really do anything about it. And so here with the spines are attacking there, and they're doing a lot of damage. No, Scarlet has 7 workers, so if she loses this, she's out of the game. Rogue still has 13 workers, and his workers are at least at his base. But look, the spines are going to be taking out the spawning pool. Now remember, without the spawning pool, Rogue can't make Zerglings, and Rogue can't make queens. And he can't make spine crawlers either. So what you see is what you get with Rogue right now. Like Rogue really can't do much. with this thing. So now they're gonna take out Scarlet. Everything's happening so fast. Scarlet's gonna start attacking the first hatchery, and she that's so funny. So this is like another. Remember how before we talked about Rogue's scouting pattern and how had hid those two barracks right outside of where the Overlord could see. Here, this is probably why Scarlet picked this particular map. Is that spore crawler in the top of the screen there can hit some of the drones that are mining those far left minerals below, and that's those little map details where if you know that and you know that in your Scarlet, you're like, okay, I'll put my spine right there, right? She maybe would never do this on any of the other maps, but because that spine can sit on the high ground where it can't be seen and attack drones below, that may be the reason why she picked to do the strategy on this map. So here we see that Scarlet is pulling up some Zerglings outside the base. She's taking out the original base of Rogue. Oh, this is not looking good for Rogue. The Zerglings come down. If that queen goes down, that's really bad. Okay, so now Rogue's just got that one spine crawler, that one giraffe. And if that giraffe goes down, this game is over. And it's giraffe versus giraffe. They're gonna poke each other to death. But there's a second giraffe joining the fight. This is over. Rogue's lost. Oh, maybe it's close, but yeah, Rogue bows out. And I just want to see Scarlet's face here. Oh yeah, she's happy. She's got a little smile on her face. She's shaking her head no, like I just teased this boy out of existence. So Rogue's out of the tournament. Right? Rogue, one of the best Zergs of all time, loses to Scarlet. Scarlet advances to the round of 16. And on the back of some really creative, but also it is fair to say that is some dirty play, right? Like that is you're winning the game, but you're not doing it in a straight up fashion. That's a lot of subterfuge, and Rogue just Rogue's gonna go punch something. And that's some Starcraft.
Nice.
So we've watched, we watched most of the Group B of the GSL, and so I'm just curious. We might end a little bit early, but I hope that was a window into what makes competitive Starcraft kind of an exciting game to watch, on top of an exciting game to, of course, play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really fun, and I'm glad that we watched all of these different matches because now that we've seen all these different kinds of play, I have a better sense, especially of Zerg. That seems to be like the favorite here. I have a better sense of kind of how the things that we were doing in the past few weeks build up toward what they're doing.
That's really good. Let's see. Closing thoughts, questions, chat. Questions, Janelle and Kelly?
Not really. It's admittedly a sleepy day for me, so the thoughts are slow coming.
How do you know?
That's okay. Janelle?
I think overall, just StarCraft is a really fun game to play and to watch. I think in part because of how diverse the playing field is. And it has like a really interesting kind of ceiling where you can start doing something that's kind of like insular in the way that we were doing it, where it's like, oh, build up an army, fight at 10, go. Which you can't really do with a lot of game titles where you kind of like alter the game and say, as a practice, I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool to see how this one game can have so many different kinds of competition.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that makes StarCraft so interesting is like there are a lot of different win conditions, where I think that this is true for all esports and all sports in general, and this is what makes sports really interesting, right? Like what makes, I'll do a basketball example. The Golden State Warriors, who were, the best team in the NBA for a couple of years this past decade. So interesting was that, they were shooting the three more than basically any other team ever did in history, right? They were just and so when we think of like a win condition, what that, that means what do you need to do to win, right? And for the Warriors, it was like, we're going to shoot a ton of threes. We're going to outscore you. But that's not the only way to play basketball, right? It doesn't have to. Basketball isn't a 3-point contest. Another team can say, you know what? We're gonna win by, driving up the paint. We're gonna win by playing great defense. We're gonna win by doing this, that, or the other thing, right? And that's how teams get flair. They get style. They get personality, right? Because of the way that they play the game, the way that they approach, the way that they determine what they need to do to win. And what makes StarCraft interesting is the same thing, right? It's that. Scarlet can say, okay, to win these games against Rogue, maybe she just knew. She's like, I played against Rogue enough to know that I can't beat Rogue in a straight up game. Perhaps, I'm not saying that this is what she thought, but this could have been right. She could have thought, so if I don't think I have good chances of beating Rogue in a straight up game, or in a game where like I go Roach v Roach against him, okay, I'll just cheese him, right? I'll do these these strategies that if he doesn't scout them, he's gonna have a hard time holding him. And so like she changed the win condition. Like what do you have to do to win? It's not, it's not win in the Roach battle or win in the Banelings, right? She's like, I'll just, I'm gonna win, through doing something that that you don't expect, right, in the early game. And that's where StarCraft really allows for like personal expression and things like that. Is like in changing like a streamer I like to watch sometimes is called M. Canning, and he takes this unit that isn't used very much called the Disruptor, which is a Protoss unit. And the Protoss unit has the Disruptor has this really cool ability to shoot out like a little disruption zone, and then after a couple seconds, the disruption zone will explode, and it will basically kill anything in the disruption zone. It's really cool. But M. Canning will just put like a ton of them, and like he'll just throw them all out. Right, that's his style. Right, he's like the disruption guy. Right, he's like and I think that what's cool about StarCraft and a lot of sports, and this is like maybe the lesson we can take off of our kind of 3 weeks of playing StarCraft, is that personal expression is really important for any competitive esport to really excel, I think, right? Like if you have an esport where the players don't feel like they're expressing themselves, right, when they're playing, I think that won't last very long, even if it has a lot of hype behind it, right? People aren't going to be passionate about playing that game forever, or however long the game lasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's end our stream there, I guess. You guys have a fantastic day out there watching this, and we'll see you next week. I don't know. We'll figure out what we're going to do next week, but
yeah, we'll figure it out.
Good.
Special thanks to
I would say for all like maybe one person in chat, maybe we could talk briefly about the shows that are starting this week.
Oh yeah, okay. So we got some new shows, starting this week. Nothing on Tuesday. This is our last show on Monday, but on Wednesday you can check out from 12 to 1 the Lunch Zone. I don't know who's hosting this week, but it's probably gonna be a good time. Who?
I know, I was talking about the new ones.
Oh yeah. We'll get there in just a sec. I'm just Doctor's Dungeon Mattress 2 to 5, coffee break on Wednesday, coffee break on Thursday morning, 10:30 to 12, and then I've got a new show called Any Percent. I'm gonna be speedrunning Portal from 12 to 2 on Thursday, and then Janelle, what's going on Thursday too?
Yeah, so this Thursday is the first episode of Keeping It 100. It's a completionist show, and I'm going to be playing through Assassin's Creed Origins in preparation for the new one coming out in December.
Nice. So, and nothing on Friday, so, but please come check out our other streams, and you can catch up with any of our shows on YouTube. We have a good time, and I had a fun time today.
Today was great. And special thanks to Eric for guiding us through the really complicated casting world of StarCraft. It was not nearly as daunting as I thought it would have been, so thank you.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't as daunting. StarCraft is probably my favorite game ever, so I'm glad I could share a little bit of my passion for it with you guys. All right. Bye, chat.